When people disappear, they rarely disappear at the beginning. That is what makes it confusing. In the beginning, they are there, reliable, warm, responsive in all the ways that teach you not to brace for absence. They answer messages. They remember small details about your life. They show up often enough that you stop expecting distance. And then life shifts. Something heavy enters the room, a diagnosis, a death, a breakup, a crisis that refuses to resolve neatly. And something changes in them. Not visibly at first. Not in a way you can point to and call cruelty. Just a thinning. The replies arrive later. The calls become shorter. The presence that once felt effortless starts to recede until eventually you realize you are standing inside something that feels strangely familiar. You are carrying the weight alone. What hurts about this is not simply the absence itself. It is the timing of it. The disappearance arrives exactly where support should have deepened, exactly where closeness should have moved toward you rather than away. And because there is no explanation attached to it, the mind almost immediately begins constructing one of its own. Maybe I became too much. Maybe my pain exhausted them. Maybe I needed something I should not have needed. But most of the time, the story is not about you at all. Most of the time, it began long before you ever existed in their life. What withdrawal actually is. It helps to define this carefully because withdrawal during crisis is misunderstood in both directions. People receiving it often interpret it as proof of indifference. People doing it often interpret it as proof that they are fundamentally incapable of love. Usually, neither interpretation is accurate. Psychologist John Bowlby's foundational work on attachment, later expanded through decades of research by Mary Ainsworth and others, identified consistent patterns in how human beings learn closeness, comfort, and emotional dependence. One of these patterns, avoidant attachment, tends to emerge in environments where emotional needs were not met with obvious hostility, but with something quieter. Discomfort, distance, subtle withdrawal. This does not require dramatic neglect. It often happens in homes that looked perfectly functional from the outside. Parents who provided food, safety, structure, and consistency in practical ways, but whose emotional responses shifted when distress entered the room. The child cries and something in the caregiver tightens. The child reaches out and something becomes distant. No one announces a rule. No one says your emotions are unwelcome. The lesson arrives through repetition instead. The child learns something with remarkable speed. Need creates distance. Vulnerability creates discomfort. And eventually the safest thing becomes needing less. The mind absorbs this lesson so deeply that it stops feeling like a lesson at all. It starts feeling like reality. Years later, the child becomes an adult sitting across from someone they care about deeply. That person is grieving, frightened, overwhelmed. They need closeness. And somewhere beneath awareness, an old alarm system begins activating. Not because love disappeared, because emotional intensity once meant danger. Attachment explains part of the pattern, but it does not explain the guilt that so often arrives afterward. Psychologist Price Tangney spent decades studying the distinction between guilt and shame, and the difference matters enormously here. Guilt says I did something bad. Shame says I am something bad. Guilt usually motivates repair. Shame motivates disappearance. For many people who withdraw during crisis, the internal experience is not a hat. I do not want to help. It is something closer to, I do not know how to help, followed almost immediately by, I should know how, followed finally by the conclusion, shame always delivers. There must be something wrong with me. The crisis suddenly asks for capacities they do not trust themselves to possess. The ability to sit with pain without fixing it, the ability to remain steady inside uncertainty, the ability to witness suffering without needing to escape it. Instead of experiencing these as skills they have not learned yet, shame converts them into character judgments. I am inadequate. I fail people. I cannot do this. And shame has a very predictable behavioral signature. It hides. From the inside, withdrawal often does not feel like abandonment at all. It feels like removing a flawed person from a situation that deserves someone better. The tragedy is that the protective instinct creates the very wound it was trying to avoid. When the nervous system goes offline. There is another layer beneath all of this, and it explains why many people describe withdrawal as something that felt automatic rather than chosen. Neuroscientist Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory proposes different states of nervous system activation that shape how people respond to stress. Most people know fight or flight. Less discussed is a third response, shutdown. When emotional intensity exceeds what the nervous system believes it can manage, the system sometimes stops moving toward action altogether. Energy drops, clarity narrows, connection becomes difficult. The outside world sees distance. The inside world experiences fog. People in this state often report knowing they should reach out while feeling strangely incapable of doing so. They think about texting back and somehow never do. They think about calling and feel an immediate heaviness, a pressure they cannot explain. From the outside, this can look careless. It can look like someone simply decided not to show up, but often the experience is closer to a system that has shifted into survival mode without permission. The caring is still there. Access to it is not. Psychologist John Gottman's research on relationships identified a pattern called stonewalling, a withdrawal from communication that consistently predicted relational breakdown. What makes silence uniquely painful is that silence creates a vacuum, and human minds do not tolerate vacuums very well. If someone criticizes you, there is at least information available. You can argue with it, reject it, understand it. Silence gives nothing. And so the mind fills in the missing pieces itself. They do not care. I overwhelmed them. I was too much. I should not have needed anything. None of these interpretations are reliably true. But when information disappears, the mind tends to reach first for explanations that preserve coherence. And coherence often arrives through self-blame. That is why silence wounds in ways words often do not. Words close possibilities. Silence leaves all of them open. What this means for the person left behind. If someone disappeared during your hardest moment, understanding the mechanism does not erase the pain. It hurt because absence during crisis hurts. The wound is real. But understanding changes what the silence means. It is rarely proof that you were too needy, too emotional, or too difficult to stay beside. Far more often, it is evidence of someone reaching the edge of capacities they never learned how to build. That does not mean you owe endless patience to every unavailable person who enters your life. Understanding a pattern does not require sacrificing yourself to it, but it does change where the hurt belongs. Not I was too much. I needed something this person could not sustain. Those are very different stories. Only one of them becomes part of your identity. What this means for the person who disappears. If you recognize yourself here, trying harder usually does not solve the problem, because effort was never the missing piece. Research on attachment repair and shame resilience suggests something slower and less dramatic, gradually building tolerance for staying present during manageable discomfort before expecting yourself to survive overwhelming intensity. Remaining in the room a little longer, staying on the phone a little longer, sitting with someone's sadness without immediately trying to escape it, and perhaps most importantly, naming the pattern before crisis arrives. Telling someone, sometimes when emotions become intense, something in me pulls away. Not because I stop caring, because I shut down. The explanation does not erase the wound entirely if withdrawal happens again, but it changes the meaning of the silence. An unexplained absence becomes a named pattern, and named patterns lose some of their power. Most people who disappear during crisis are not trying to hurt anyone. Most people left behind by that disappearance are not wrong for feeling hurt by it either. Both experiences can exist at the same time. The person withdrawing is often following instructions written long before the relationship began, instructions that once protected them and now cost them something they genuinely do not want to lose. And the person waiting in silence is not imagining the pain of that absence. The pain is real. But the silence was never actually empty. It was carrying an entire history neither of you could see. The difference is that now it has language, and language changes things. Until the next one.